Hello, I am Paolo. I am the Master of Ceremonies here at IICSR, and I can't wait to have you here to learn together how to learn sustainability and make this planet better. Come to see how beautiful is the place where you're gonna be.
Amazing, huh? I wanted to build a more inclusive world. That's why I joined IICSR.
Hi, I am Venu Tiwari. I have joined IICSR postgraduate course on CSR and sustainability. I wanted to learn about ESG, CSR and SDGs. IICSR has the best faculty for this course.
Shadi, the air quality index in Delhi is 216 today. It's the worst possible air quality index.
That's really too much, and we all have to do something to climate change.
We all want to build a sustainable and inclusive world, and IICSR is the only place which is training you all. Come join us.
So let's start with the session, fireside chat, and I would like to invite Ms. Anjali Tarapura from GM HDFC Limited and Mr. Pratik Patra from EY. We'll start with the sustainable finance. The topics are the evolving meaning and the investor perspective about Indian and international. We'll discuss about peers and role of startups and building sustainable economy by integrating ESG and important indicators from investor lens, and the last but not the least, expectation from the future practitioners. And thank you so much for joining again. Over to you.
Thank you, Pratiksha. So, from the start of the day, right, we've been talking about embedded into our organizational policies, business strategies, so on and so forth, right? And one of the key challenges, right, that companies would face and are facing as well is the how do they transition from where they are to where they would be, right? And they would need a certain amount of financing to be done, right? If they have to, for example, we had an example where a waste treatment solution was to be, heat absorption solution was to be implemented. So they had to find money to do that, right? And it could be to even diversify into, let's say, an oil and gas company diversifying into alternate energy segments, right? So they would need money to do that. And financing plays a very key role, right? And in this session, we plan to cover some of those aspects on sustainable finance. And to discuss these aspects with me, we have Anjali Tarapur, who's been a veteran at HDFC for 25 years. And she works with their management services and investor relations department. And she's also the business responsibility officer of HDFC. And she has...
You promised you were going to keep all biodata as absolutely short.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah,
this was the shortest. I was actually, so it's quite impressive, and I was quite finding it difficult to cut it short, which one should I remove? But
so,
yes, we'll
job is done. No, there's the one thing that we all must recognize is that in the ESG space, everyone is in a learning mode. That's the first start. When you walk out with that certificate of yours, it's going to be something of a premium in the markets because there are very, very few certified people with ESG. But always remember that it will continue to be a journey of learning throughout. All yours now.
Thank you. So when we talk about sustainable finance, right, we've seen that it's a relatively new term, I would say, in the finance world, and it also evolved. It has evolved, and it is still evolving. We now see a multitude of products which fall under the umbrella of sustainable finance, right? Initially, it was, initially it started with green loans or green bonds, which are very much focused only on environmental or green-related activities. But over the past 2 years, maybe because of the pandemic, we see that it has evolved, not just being a focused activity. It has, so we have now sustainability related factors being embedded into a financing transaction, right? For example, if a lender, if an investor lends out a certain portion of debt capital to NBFCs or other banks, they put in a condition that a certain percentage of their loan portfolio has to be to people with with physical challenges, right? So these and if they are able to meet some of and lenders also put similar kind of conditions while extending financing, saying that if the company is able to achieve certain parameters, maybe improvement in their ESG scoring, right, or achieving a certain level of carbon emission reductions, they would get or embedding sustainable supply chain aspects into their supply chain, they would get benefits in terms of the interest that they are charging, right? So from being a topic focused financing to having this embedded into the transaction, the journey has evolved quite a lot. And Anjali, it would be good to also understand, while we see a lot of these happening in the global market, how do you see this evolving, or how the drive has been in the Indian market, especially with HDFC, what kind of products they have come out, and if you could share some insights, it would be really helpful.
Sure. So anyway, let me just start by saying that I'm absolutely cognizant that it is Saturday evening. It's the last session. I just hope, Harsha, we don't have any human rights violations over here. Nobody is here under duress. But it's a pleasure to be here. It's wonderful, even just a few minutes outside, talking to a couple of you. Each one of you all come from different streams. Each one's journey through ESG is going to be different. But how you chalk it out in your own company's path is something that was going to be driven by people like you all. The way I would say is that the whole argument has shifted completely. It starts with a huge mindset change that we have seen. For companies, a lot of it came driven by investors initially, largely from companies that had very large shareholders who were foreign investors. That thrust on ESG started coming in a lot faster. But let's go back. The G pillar has been very strong. It started, I think, in the early 1990s in India. It's been something that has always been there, but they wanted to formalize corporate governance in India, and this happened in the early 90s. In fact, you'd hear of the large industrialists, Rahul Bajaj, the former, he's deceased now, but he was one of the champions. Kumaramangalam Birla, one of the champions on corporate governance. Narayan Murthy. So we've had a series of committees. The corporate governance side is fairly well set in India today. Governance will always be an overarching emphasis because governance is just human behavior in an ethical manner. You will have multiple definitions of it, but it is just the value and the culture of your organization. That pillar is the most sacred pillar in any company or any organization. The second part is on the social side that has been coming through, and the social side had two dimensions. The first dimension was an offshoot of what we see as CSR. The second dimension is how do you interact with your own people in your own organization. So then we come to address issues around human resources, diversity, inclusion, equity, all part of your own organization. And the last pillar is obviously the environment pillar. It seems to be a lot newer for many of us over here, but it's a focus area that we can no company can ignore it. Earlier on, we'd all say the manufacturing companies are polluting, we're services, we're okay. That argument doesn't work anymore. We're all responsible for a carbon footprint. We're all struggling to measure it scientifically, and we're all struggling to see how incrementally we can all turn more sustainable. But there is no divide going forward that will say certain bits are sustainable and certain bits aren't. You will have to imbibe it in your organization. So I'm of the view that it's not going to be the chief sustainability officer of a company driving it. It has to be embedded in every function across the organization. So ESG, every department will have one slice of the ESG. And as a chief sustainability officer, your role will be taking all those little jigsaw pieces and putting it together to make it the bigger company. Sorry, I didn't speak on sustainability, but you can.
You answered a part of the next question that I was going to ask. You mentioned that it is important that these concepts get embedded into not only at a particular level, but across the organization, across different levels, different processes, and it is very much important in my perspective as well. After all, banking, if you say it's a business of trust and managing risks, right? And we see that especially risks around climate change and environmental factors have a defined transmission channel to other, to other risk areas which a bank manages, which could be the credit risk, market risk, so to say. They are the most prone, right? And so this question goes hand in hand. So we have sustainable finance or sustainability linked financial products on one hand, and then you also have how do you apply the lens of climate risk or ESG risk on while extending a loan to a borrower.
So HDFC is a housing finance company. Our core business is giving housing finance loans. So the way we positioned our company was we always knew that our core business fulfilled a huge social objective because housing is a basic necessity. We try to address all income segments across to find housing finance solutions for the lower income groups, the middle income groups, the higher income groups. We try and look for housing finance solutions for the informal sector, for rural loans. We are trying to deepen our carbon footprint. But at the end of the day, we know, and we're also aligning with the government's view, which came out with its overarching flagship program, which was called Housing for All. So the drive towards getting more Indians towards having a home was our central theme. It's correlated to our core business. As a finance company, we have to look at sustainable finance under three verticals. One is on the liability side. Where are you going to get the funding from? With us, we started out our first loan that we took under a scheme called the Sustainable Use for Renewable Energy and Finance. It was a line of credit that came from the National Housing Bank, which is our refinancing agency. The end use of this was meant to be for green and affordable housing. Now, all of us come from this academic space where they say that if you have a green loan, the chances are you'll get lower cost of funding. The reality of the market at that point in time was it was one of our highest costs of funding that we had, simply because NHB in turn had borrowed from an overseas agency. There was a huge swap cost involved, and it wasn't cheap money. So the greenium, which is like you're getting a premium, there is a reason why more investors will want to look at green finance. The reality is it doesn't always immediately translate into lower cost funding. But nonetheless, we took a very considered call and we said we will draw down on this small bit of line of credit because it symbolizes and it shows our determination to be able to find sustainable solutions for green housing. Remember one thing, in India, just 5% of our buildings are green right now. And in India, land is a state subject. So every state has its own regulations as far as real estate is concerned. Nonetheless, we are seeing a number of states today also recognizing benefits of being able to have green homes. So then they will start saying that maybe we should have homes that can be qualified under a green rating system. or they will make it mandatory. Certain states have made it mandatory to have water harvesting. Certain states are saying that we can, allow more solar panels to come in. The process is happening. It's very encouraging. But let me come back to the liability side. The second line of credit we drew down was from the multilateral agencies. That was IFC and AIIB. Both of these came with conditionalities that said that you can take this money, but you have to on-lend for affordable housing and green housing. They came with very specific covenants that if we were going to lend to developers who were building green homes, we then needed to do excess monitoring under these loans. So what we call today environment and social monitoring, which is ENS monitoring. So it's not just about where your money goes, but you need to go to the developer. The developer then needs to be able to certify to you that he is not using bonded labor, that he's paying his wages to all the laborers, that he's taking care of their accommodation. There are regulations that are already in place for every construction that you have, every construction site. There are already regulations that says that you mandatorily have to have a creche facility over there. These are things that were there but not being monitored by all of us. Many, many agencies. You see a lot of NGOs working on construction sites. The dialogue that we're having today is making us more sensitized to a number of these issues. And that's where the positive optimism is there. But we said we're not just going to take wholesale funding. It's as important to get to people like you and me. We said, let's look at retail, trying to raise resources from individuals. So we have a deposits program. Everybody comes and puts their savings into HDFC. We're a AAA rated company. But we said we'll go one step beyond. And we said we launched green deposits. So those green deposits will only be, those funds that come under green deposits will only be utilized either for green housing or if it meets one of the sustainable SDG goals. And one of the core goals for us is women empowerment. Now, how does women empowerment come as far as housing is concerned? When women are home owners, we are respecting their rights, their property rights. Once they're home owners, their stake in society is always much better. So I don't know, just before in our previous session, somebody was talking about 17 SDGs. As an organization, you do not need to tick the box on all 17. Pick what is relevant for you.
Thank you. Couple of points that you mentioned were quite interesting. That the cost of funds that initially that was taken to give away these loans on greenhouses, it was expensive, right? And maybe it could have been done to meet some of the strategic objectives as an organization, right? Now the question is, why should...
You can't do that sustainably.
Exactly.
So the next thing is, the next line, whenever we are drawing down an external commercial borrowing, which is overseas borrowings, where there's a greater buy-in towards these kind of goals, our basic mandate is that it either has to be equated to the cost of a domestic borrowing or lower than a domestic borrowing at an all-in hedged cost. So we will not, you have to use commercials, but balance it out with sustainable goals that work for your company.
And also, if you could share some insights whether the portfolio of green loans, do you see them having a different behavior in terms of their defaults from...
At this juncture, no, not at all. And surprisingly and very encouragingly, we have green rated homes for the mid-housing, for the lower income groups as well as the upper income groups. So it is not necessarily that, we tend to believe that the high-end premium homes will be green. That's not the case. Maybe your high-end premium homes will have EV chargers over there and not at a mid-income stream. But in design of buildings, there's a lot of change happening as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess lot of this finance plays a very key role, right? And even government has
I
certain
think that's the
policies.
whole debate that is happening at every COP successively, is where the advanced economies and the what they call as the global south, and they're saying, you know, y'all promised us the money a long time back, and today when you look at all the macroeconomic conditions, it's not going to happen. The message coming through is that, again, each country has to adopt its own path. We're not going to be able to wait eternity to say, you know, you promised us $100 billion. We have to find solutions that work for ourselves. And at the same time, we can't be browbeaten and dictated by the advanced world to tell you that you need to fall and determine your targets. So at the last COP, when India said 2070, there was a big debate because some of them said India is not ambitious enough as far as its climate risks are concerned. On the other hand, we were realistic. We would say that we cannot do away with fossil fuel right away, but we will incrementally show progress. The ESG journey is about progress. Just never forget that.
That brings us to I mean, I would like to use this opportunity to transition from finance to how do we communicate the various kind of sustainability initiatives that is being undertaken, maybe at by various corporates. Why is it important? Why is it important to communicate to both the internal stakeholders and external stakeholders? That would be quite interesting.
Sure. So the main thing, as I mentioned, once again, coming back to the point, is that this role is a very interesting role, is because you need to interact with all your stakeholders internally first. You need to understand your business. Always remember that ESG does not sit outside, it's not a bucket sitting outside of your corporate world. Even though you may not have budgets, you may not have targets, in the sense you're not part of the revenue line, all the other people in line functions, you need to understand their functions because there is a sustainability angle in each one of them. So you need to get their buy-in. I'll give you simple examples. When you talk to HR, you need to be able to sensitize them to be able to be just monitoring what your diversity ratios look like. Because as they say, what you do not measure, you do not monitor. And that is really, really true. For the longest of times, we were not measuring our carbon footprint even at HDFC. This is an exercise that we started almost about 15 years ago. We were ahead of the curve. We gave it up, and then we started it again 5 years ago. So in hindsight, we lost out, but we had to start from ground zero all over again. There was a time, you know, the mindset was when we first recorded our carbon footprint on the travel, and of course, air travel will always be the largest footprint. Our management told us, we are traveling from work. So, you know, why are you saying that we have the largest carbon footprint? The mindsets have completely changed today. It's not easy to collect GHG data. Let me tell you that. Everybody, I mean, we in HDFC, we're spread across almost 700 offices. They're small offices. And to try and get teams to even put in place what their electricity consumption is was a humongous task. So no matter how much of cajoling and pleading and threatening, it wasn't working. That's the time people like y'all who are going to come out and look at ESG, you need to be able to think of new solutions. So I'll just give you a very simple example. Everybody pays their electricity bills. So we said, yeah, we tried to get the facilities management or the administrative teams to recollect all the electricity bills to be able to put down to see what our scope 2 emissions were going to be. It didn't work. We went back to our accounts department and told all the accountants that you are paying the bill. You have a role to play on ESG because you have a role to help us get accurate information on our GHG emissions. So the accountant initially said, okay, well, okay, I'm paying my bill, so what? We said, please put the number of units consumed over there. Some put some rubbish data, some just left it blank, continued to pay the bill. Then we said, let's get a little smarter. We got our IT department in and said, block the system, don't allow the payment till they put in the units of electricity consumed. And now today, after all this rigmarole, it's IT, press one button, and we're getting a dump. So we are not using proxy data. But these are things that you have to think of innovatively. You can have the best software there, but if you are plugging in junk, you are going to get junk. And that happens for MIS, that happens for ESG, that happens for your GHG, that happens right across the board. So integrity of data is very important, but getting the buy-in of people to understand why you need that data is doubly important.
And to add on to what Anjali mentioned, so for the carbon emissions for a typical manufacturing entity or any other corporate, the computation and the reporting is completely different from what happens at a financial institution, right? What she mentioned was one challenge around data, electricity which the bank is itself consuming. Now imagine the bank trying to understand how to meet its net zero if they have a net zero target. So they cannot meet their net zero target if their scope 3 emissions is also not, is not included. So it is not a holistic approach that the bank would have. And the majority of the scope 3 emissions is from their lending and investment portfolios, right? And so there are these practical challenges, and lot of us are trying to solve that.
So gone are the days where you can say, okay, I'm saving electricity. Gone are the days where you said, I've put an aerator, I've put LED bulbs over there, and I've met my ESG, at least on the E side, I'm okay. No investor is buying that today. Today, the whole argument is now shifting to say, you're a finance company. As a result of what you are financing, what is your carbon footprint? And that's, at this juncture, this is our biggest challenge, because data is hugely lacking. But it's not enough to try and hide behind the curtains and say, I can't do scope 3 emissions because I don't have data. And I'll give you one example. 20 years ago, there was no credit bureau in the country. So everybody, each bank gave loans. We didn't know whether you had a good history, a bad history. Each bank had to do their own analysis. 20 years ago, State Bank of India, HDFC, and two foreign firms, one was Dun & Bradstreet and TransUnion, came together to form the first credit bureau. At that point in time, the first question was, why should we share data? The second question was, SBI says, we aren't even computerized. Our data is scattered over thousands and thousands of branches. How are we ever going to do that? 20 years now, we've got multiple credit bureaus. Not a single loan is ever given out without running data through the credit bureau. So we're at this inflection point today where we can say, yes, we don't have data on carbon emissions, but we're all going to have to work across product lines to be able to determine the data. So when I look at it narrowly and say, okay, I'm looking at it only from green buildings perspective. But if you look at construction, there are about 500 industries that goes into construction. There's a huge supply chain. And each one of these people in turn need to be monitoring their carbon footprint. It's going to happen. It's not going to be easy, but it is the path of the future. So to say that there isn't information available, so I'm not able to do it, is not an excuse anymore. But it's tough. It's really tough, because if you make projections and you turn around and tell your investors, yes, I'm going to be carbon neutral or net zero by 2030, and you're no longer there. Large international banks have been sued today for overpromising. So it's not an easy task. Promise what you can deliver. And in India, we also have to be realistic as far as our carbon footprint is concerned, is that the electricity that you and I consume, today we don't have a choice of who our utility provider is. Legislation is currently underway. So we've got one bill in Parliament that has passed the Lok Sabha, which is called the Energy Conservation Act. That act will be a game changer. if the bill gets passed, which one hopes it will, where they said that at least industrial, large commercial entities and certain large residential premises will mandatorily need to source some of their energy from renewables. India is going to be leading on renewables. That's very clear. We've seen a lot of foreign investment come in, and huge amounts, our large industrial conglomerates are all focusing on green hydrogen, fuel cells, renewables. That is, we've got investors, we've got the buy-in, but we need a few regulatory tweaks. The Electricity Amendment Act is also very, very critical. Reforms are not easy, especially in a pre-election year. Reforms, especially power reforms, are not going to be easy. But this is the big picture that you also have to look at when you're looking at ESG. So don't ever forget your macro picture. The macroeconomic environment matters a lot when you are trying to figure out what are the ESG policies that work for you. Because sometimes it's regulation, sometimes it's your own business, and sometimes you have to be innovative as well.
Absolutely, and it definitely has to be a collective effort to find a solution which we are facing across different industries, and this is a good cohort. I mean, this is what I would expect, that we understand these challenges that are there, which have come out of our discussions, and we think through in our own roles in the current organizations, how could we try and address some of them. Let me use this opportunity to take any questions from the audience.
And anyone can please answer also, okay? Because none of us always have all the answers here.
Right.
And at the end of the day, I have to be really honest, his firm is my auditor. He'll say that Chinese walls, but the fact is this firm is my auditor. So I have to be absolutely accurate on what I'm saying.
No, so it's not about being accurate, it's all about being true. So that we know the actual picture, and it's being about transparent as well. So here we do understand that, it was very difficult for you to get the internal data as well, because obviously there were several challenges.
Difficult means I'm just using it jocularly. It's your job. You have to get the data, come what may. But
Right.
as I said, you have to try different ways of doing it. Different organizations will have different ways of doing it.
Right. So I was a bit curious to understand whether we have ENS monitoring system in place to understand the end use of funds as well.
Yeah.
But how authentic data we are getting from ENS monitoring is also equally important, right? So do we have any ESG audit in place, or whether we see any scope of services there as well?
So people like you all will have a lot of business to do, as more and more of us need assurances, more and more of us need consultancy. The number of ESG consultants are going to be mushrooming all over. That's why the certificate of yours is really, really important. But having said that, at this point in time, we have made, this is again an internal policy. So we said non-individual loans above a certain threshold. And what are our non-individual loans? The non-individual loans that we are giving is, let's say, for construction finance. And why do we give construction finance? Is because you need to finance the supply. Because if there's no finance of the supply, there are no homes, and then we can't give home loans. So it's a chain. We've put in place a system of trying to do ENS assessments. Some of the listed developers, it's a lot easier to do because there's a buy-in already, there is data there. But in India, the entire real estate market is so fragmented. So when you go down the line, somebody will turn around and say, it's not a regulation. मैं नहीं करने वाला हूँ. So we have to negotiate, we have to work. One of the things that we realized is it comes out of a space of ignorance, not as a space of resistance. So we tied up with IGBC, this is the India Green Buildings Council. We had an MOU with them, and we said what we needed to do is really sensitization. So we have the developer relationships. So we got the developers together, and we started telling them why it's important to do it. If you see today's newspaper, CREDAI, which is a voluntary body of all developers, had said they have pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050, which is we may get there, we may not get there. But the fact is, we've got developers as a voluntary organization. It's not regulation telling them to do it. That's a huge positive as far as I'm concerned. That will give me confidence, or give our organization confidence, to be able to say our supply chain is falling in line. So we too can move out to see if we're looking at these kind of targets, and obviously it's not just looking at scope 1 and scope 2 can all be done maybe by the 2030s, 2035. But you can't, on your financed emissions, it may take a little longer. But there are a lot of good things happening. Don't be pessimistic. You know, we look at the environment, we say recession happening, global geopolitical risks are heightened. There's a lot of good work happening also on the ground. So yes, we will formally get through. We will need assurances. Data is scanty still. There are a lot of the data that is coming in is where there were already environmental approvals required, and we have a fairly stringent system. The question is, were we monitoring it? Is the big issue. And now we're all monitoring it. You know, one of the things that HDFC did right at the beginning is we said that we'd never give a developer a loan unless all his approvals were in place. One of the big chunk of approvals were the environmental approvals. So by default, because we thought we were just prudent, at that point in time, we didn't know that we needed to do it from an environmental perspective. The other thing that we did is we have 2 insurance companies. So all along we told the borrower it's good to have insurance. We didn't know the pandemic was coming, but yes, there were fatalities. But the family was able to retain their home because they had life insurance. But we also sold non-life insurance. And non-life insurance guards you against not just fire and theft, but any natural disaster, any floods, those kind of things, which is growing more and more important from a climate perspective. So some things we were doing by not really with the intention of meeting this ESG goal, we were doing it because it was good for the customer. But we're able to now recognize the importance of making the home insured because it helps a customer just in case there is, you know, a natural calamity, a landslide, bushfires, floods, etc. So the big picture is falling in place. But yes, we'll need lots and lots of assurance, lots and lots of auditors, lots and lots of consultants to help us through this journey. But by and large, I'm saying it's very important to tell your own story. Don't get it just simply outsourced because it's the easy thing to do. And a lot of companies are doing that today. You need to go through that grind yourself because that's when your ESG story will be genuine.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very complicated topic which encompasses a lot of dimensions, a lot of aspects. Yeah, we've got very limited on time, so I'll just take one question.
We can wind up 10 minutes earlier.
We've got one question.
But let them all talk. That's the main thing.
Is way behind in circular economy. What is your opinion? This question is by Mr. Amarendra Pal Singh.
Great question. We're all working towards it. So as I mentioned earlier, you know, we can't say that you're a manufacturing entity, you need to take care of water. As a company, even in HDFC, we are beginning to monitor our water. As what doesn't get measured doesn't get monitored, as I said. So it is a requirement. It is something that we need to do because it's good for the system. But we don't have all the answers as of now. In fact, even at HDFC also, we've done the BRSR for 2 years now, but we still have gaps. And the idea is it's always going to remain a work in progress. But you need to say, as long as your current year's report is an improvement on the previous year's report, you're on the right track.
I will take a question from him because he had raised his hands first.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. Green finance is relatively a new top concept as such. But I understand that globally, green bonds have taken up in the last few years quite well. So what is the experience at HDFC and perhaps for India as well?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, we have lines of funding both for green and affordable housing. Just recently, when the Reserve Bank of India raised the ECB limit from $750 million to $1.5 million, they did that because of what was happening globally. We needed foreign exchange coming in. We took advantage of that window. We raised a social loan. So this was the largest social loan that has been there, again to be used for affordable housing. But at the end of the day, I would say don't get too taken up by all these. There are multiple shades of green. There are multiple ways of greenwashing. There are multiple ways of green hushing, which means I don't declare my environmental footprint. But I would say is whatever you do, if you are taking money for an end purpose, you've got to be very clear that you're going to be using that properly, because that's when reputational risks come in. And in finance, you just cannot afford to do that. So don't overcommit. If you can't meet something, today one would, given the fact that just about 5% of buildings are green, I can't say 100% of my borrowings can be green. It's not going to work, because I don't have enough of projects to be able to lend over there. But is the system changing? The answer is yes. Do you have an aspiration to keep increasing this pie year after year? The answer is yes. But to your question, one of the best things that happened was yesterday's news. The government has come out with its sovereign green bond framework. It's 16,000 crores. It seems large. It's 1% of the government's borrowing. But it's a very good step. It's a step in the right direction.
Thanks, Anjali. I'm sorry, we'll take other questions offline. I'll hand over the mic to Pratiksha. Thank you, Anjali. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. And as I said, just keep reading, stay abreast with news, because there's an alphabet soup of ESG terms coming out. Every day there's a new body being created. Every day there's a new ESG term. Just stay abreast and do what you think works well for your organizations. That's the only piece of advice I do. Be patient. It's not just like a silver bullet that you have answers to everything all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anjali ma'am and Pratik. It was wonderful having a fireside chat with two of you. So let's felicitate Anjali ma'am.
Thank you so much. And as I said, there's always a learning both ways. Each time, we talk, we all learn a little bit from each other.
I think great learning comes from great leaders, and we all have them today. So let's summarize today's panel discussion. I would like to call upon Narendra Tiwari, sir.
Thank you, Pratiksha. So yeah, before I start summarizing, I just wanted to know whether we were really attentive during this session or not. So
It's okay to say no.
yeah, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Though it's okay to say no, but you should be attentive. So yeah. So before I summarize, I just wanted to know, what do you understand whether E, S, or G factor is the critical factor of any organization? What is your take out of this whole discussions? What we have done? Any of your opinion? Which of these parameters are really very important? What about 1% then? Which stream you will give that 1%? So it's 33, 33, 33, right?
The 1% should go to the CEO or the board director, that he plays the important role in understanding.
Yes. I completely agree. So yes, all three factors are equally important. So initially, during first session, we do understand that, we had why ESG and why now. So during that session, we do understand that, all three parameters are equally important. Tejasvi highlighted key factors that predictability is also required apart from sustainability. We do need to predict what are the factors which will play important role for our internal organization, maybe for E, S or G equally. And similarly, when we were discussing about key factors E, S or G, Priyanka highlighted one important factor, that was with respect to what is more important, E, S or G. For some companies, not necessary S is important factor, like she highlighted about construction industries, because that is dominated by majorly male-dominated industries. So that's why in some of the organization, it will depend whether it's E or G, or maybe S is also equally important. So we should keep in mind that E, S and G will vary based on industries which we are working with. So it's not necessary that, we need to think about 33% equally. Yes, that is equal, but at overall level, yes, you're right. But when you're working with industries, it will vary. Like for some banks, it's G, which is really important, because how they present it in front of their stakeholders, how they, what kind of policies they have in place to make sure that they're actually lending to the green issuers and green borrowers itself. So that's how it depends from one company to another company, or maybe industries as well. So that's what we have learned, and we took, concluded from why ESG and why now. Right time for ESG, we do understand that, from past 5 years, like even we came to know from Anjali as well that, every company from past 20, 15 years, they were trying to understand what kind of parameters they can introduce internally, and they can, maybe they can derive some score out of ESGs as well, maybe some parameters to have some lending parameters to these kind of companies who are green companies. But it was really difficult. But from past 5 years, majorly because of various companies coming up with various data, though it's not reliable, being blunt, not reliable though to start with, but at least they have something to start with. Over a year, like what we have improved ourselves in bureaus area, we started getting relevant data. We are expecting this also to emerge and have more reliable data in place. So that's how we understood that why ESG is required right now. So this is the critical time. In second session, where we all four were discussing about roadmap of enterprise in ESG, we understood that how we can embed ESG in our organization. So the conclusion was that we need to understand the materiality assessment. Critical role was double materiality. It's not that how environment can impact company. It's equally important how company is actually working back with environment as well. So that's how we need to do materiality assessment first. We understood we should understand where we are right now, do the gap analysis, where we want to reach, or what's the goal of companies, basis which we need to create a roadmap for our own companies. So while I'll discuss about the roadmap for respective companies, we concluded that with how they can integrate these kind of ESG as well in their respective companies and respective areas. Post that, we had another great session with Pratyush and Shantanu, where we understood ESG integration in companies. We had a great example with respect to power companies, where specifically Shantanu have explained us in detail in depth with statistical analysis as well, how much, what is the requirement in power companies, what are the stats which they were working towards, what were the goal basis scope 27, and also what were the targets what they want to achieve by 2050 and 2070 as well, aligning with our India's target as well of 2030 and 2070. So he gave a brief description about that. And similarly, Pratyush sir have also highlighted various concepts about CSR, ESG, sustainability, SDG goals. So we understood about those main concepts as well. And last, the recent conversation what we had right now, where Anjali have highlighted about various things happening in the SDFC specifically in this organization, how they are evolving, how they are making sure that the companies have a certain goal in place where they'll obviously, even though it was in terms of maybe in terms of costing, if I may say, it was not feasible for them because obviously it was expensive. But still, they opted for their company's goal and how they wanted to achieve it. Through that, also they came to know that IFC may have certain requirements to fulfill, like ANC and various monitoring parameters as well. So that's how SDFC is working towards to attain their carbon net zero goals as well. So this is what we have learned out of these 4 sessions. Before I conclude this, now we can overall, if we have any other questions which we were unable to address, and if we feel that we can address those questions right now as well, it's good forum to raise right now. The floor is open. On WhatsApp or anyways, we 4. Yeah, sure. At least I'll make sure that Jangu, Vidya, Narendra, and Pratik, we 4 will be there for sure for at least next 3 months. We'll be in continuous touch with each and every person. So we'll make sure that we'll continuously address these questions as well. Meanwhile, anyone wants to comment or anyone wants to have their own opinion, who wants to say something here, the floor is open right now.
Yeah, now we'll have a group picture.
Good evening, one and all. So we must clap for ourselves that we have been in time, and if we are in time in the program, we will also implement the framework in time. That is, we will make 2030 commitment, 2050 and 2070. It starts with following the timelines. So let's have a big clap for all of us. Okay, I will thank Mr. Tiwari for such impressive concluding remarks, where he emphasized and also assured that we are going to be together in our journey as we move forward. And Anjali ma'am also in the last session, ma'am, well done. You kept us involved and you also told it's important to be learning both ways. So with the ma'am's permission, big applause for the students. Without them, this program wouldn't have been there. So all the students, offline and online, big applause for them. Now I call Ms. Asha to say.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pratiksha. Thank you, Pradeep ji, for hosting and keeping us engaged and making us so disciplined throughout the day. That's commendable. And thank you to all the audiences today present in person, taking the efforts to come over here in spite of rising and decreasing COVID levels all across the world. And thank you to the people who are virtually present, although they have been traveling and they are still able to get in touch. So thank you to the technical team, Nagendra, and the ORCID team for helping us and supporting us to make the event flawless and smooth. Shall we have a group picture? We are a small set of people. Let's make it memorable. Try to get the people over there also if possible.
Ready? One more, please.
Wait.
Hold.